Hello and welcome to the Discover History YouTube channel, and tonight we're going to be on a military theme, and the military theme is going to stick with us all week. Even though our Facebook, Twitter and Instagram feeds will be mixing up history, which is what we always do, the interesting thing about our YouTube video is this week we are dedicating it to Britain's armed forces, very much like we did back in May when we dedicated the whole week in readiness or in preparation for VE Day. So all this week we're going to be dedicating this site to Britain's armed forces, and there's a reason for it, because today we have launched, or not just ourselves but Great Britain has launched Armed Forces Week, and in a way it's a celebration of our veterans, the soldiers of the past, our armed forces of the past. It also looks and thanks the armed forces of today, and what you have to remember is they have been extremely busy supporting the NHS during COVID-19. And then we also look to the future of the armed forces of the future. So it's a national celebration of Britain's armed forces. So we thought this week our YouTube channel is going to be dedicated to Britain's armed forces. And as you're probably aware, myself and Ian have both got an interest in our armed forces. So basically all this week we're going to alternate it. I'm going to do today's video, Ian will do the next day, and we're going to alternate it all this week. And it will be on the lines of the military, but a bit of a mixture. So you may get some on the military a very long time ago, or maybe military in more modern times, in the 20th century, for example. We're also going to mix it so we get a bit of Army, a bit of Royal Air Force, and obviously a bit of the senior service, the Royal Navy. So tonight I want to talk about gas warfare during the Great War. And in a way that's when it began, but it's quite interesting because if you look at that sort of warfare, some people actually say, well, technically that goes a little bit further back than the Great War. And a perfect example of that is there are some accounts of soldiers being smoked out of defences, for example, during the English Civil War, not just with smoke as well. We're talking about using all sorts of acrid things, so the smoke goes into the buildings, the soldiers start coughing and spluttering and have to vacate those premises. So some form of gas warfare has been around for some years, but when we talk about gas warfare, true gas warfare, it really exists because of the Great War. And gas was really introduced because trench warfare that developed as the war went on, the Great War that is, meant that soldiers were stuck underground for a huge amount of time. A big percentage of the time that soldiers were at the front line, they were below ground level. Famous trench warfare, which technically didn't start at the very start of the war. But when people are hidden in the ground, you have to invent weapons to get to those people, and that's when you get things like the tunnelers, the mining that was going on in the Great War. You get the reintroduction of the hand grenade, and that's a topic in its own right, because grenades have been around for a very long time, but they are introduced or reinvented, refound, shall we say, to be used in the Great War, so you can post them to the enemy trenches. And you also get obviously things like shrapnel shells and gas. And gas was invented because when the enemy are in the ground and they're hiding in all the nooks and crannies to get away from the industrial warfare, the machine gun for example, then the best thing about gas is when you release it, it will float across no man's land, that gap between the trenches, and then it will literally pour into every little nook and cranny of the trench. So it will make sure it gets to every enemy soldier. So gas was invented because of trench warfare. It was first used in 1915 at the Second Battle of Ypres, and the Germans used it, and the British soldiers at the time said all they could see approaching them was a green cloud, which was chlorine gas. And they assumed at first, as they had not seen it before, it was just a smoke screen. which could be used, and it had been used all the way through the war so far. So it was only when people started to feel the effects of it, where it got into the lungs, caused great pain in vast amounts of coughing and spluttering, that they realised it was a weapon of war. The Germans didn't really want to follow that gas because they saw the green smoke screen as such, this poison gas hanging around. They didn't want to get gassed themselves. But Britain also used it. The sad thing about it, when Britain first used gas, we were very reliant, as all soldiers are, on the direction of the wind, and the gas sailed across into no man's land towards the German trenches, and then the wind changed direction, and sadly, as the British soldiers went forward, the gas came back at them. So the first time Britain used gas, we actually gassed ourselves. But gas can be stopped as such. It can be counteracted by the wearing of what we would now term, and famously been using the word a lot with COVID-19, personal protective equipment. So what did they have during the Great War? Well, in the early years of the Great War, so remember this is gas warfare, so we're talking really 1915, they didn't really have much at all. The advice was, for example, take a handkerchief and tie it or hold it over the mouth there. Some people said a sock, or even better, as every soldier was issued eventually with a dressing. Open the dressing and you will find something like this. In other words, you will have a pad of cotton wool to go onto a bullet wound, and then a bandage attached to it. And soldiers used to wrap this around their nose and mouth to protect the entrances, really, for the gas that would go into the lungs and do a vast amount of damage. It was also revealed that if you urinate, if you use wee on a sock, on a handkerchief, or even a dressing, it will actually prevent the gas acting on your lungs. Now, there is science behind this, and it's really down to the fact that inside urine, which gives it a pungent smell when it's left to go stale, which a good tanner would know about in the Middle Ages, that's ammonia. And ammonia will counteract certain poisons in the air. So having a cloth soaked in your own urine, your own wee, will actually be, to a certain degree, protective for your lungs, really. So it does work to a certain degree. So the early days, it was nothing more than things soaked in urine or just a handkerchief. But eventually they came up with what was called the smoke hood. Now, the smoke hood is the official name for it, but most of the people called it a hypo hood, and that was down to the fact it was cloth, it was wool basically, soaked in sodium hyposulfate, and this is what they look like. They come in a little bag, by the way. The cloth, as I said, is soaked in this chemical and is nothing more, as the name suggests, nothing more than a hood, and there is a small window on it which allows you to see out, to allow you to carry on fighting as such whilst wearing the thing. The only problem is they were not very well liked. They were not very nice things to wear at all. It was very difficult to breathe in them, and the little window here used to mist up quite a bit, so they were very awkward things to wear and fight in, as you can imagine. But that's all the soldiers had. It was the next step up as gas masks were starting to develop. As the war went on, gas masks were changing very, very fast, and I mean really fast. Within months, they were coming up with new ones, and that's really down to the fact that new gases were being used. Chlorine gas was the first one. It gave this green fog, and we've all been to the swimming baths, I'm sure. You know the smell of chlorine, it's that, but it really gets into your lungs and does a lot of damage. And then as time went on, there were new gases being invented, things like phosgene gas, for example. And the problem is, you need better gas masks, so gas masks have to develop as weapons develop. And this is the interesting thing about the Great War. You have a lot of new things being invented. If we were doing a video on the tank, for example, it's brilliant. It can flatten barbed wire and things like that. But the Germans invent something like an anti-tank rifle. So you can see how everyone's trying to battle to get the best war-winning weapon. So that gas mask, the hypo hood, or the smoke hood was around for a fair bit of time, and then they realised that as the gases got worse and more dangerous, they needed an improvement on that. So you would then get one of these, and it comes in a small bag, a bit like the other one, to be honest. The other bag, however, can be placed anywhere, can be even in a pocket. This one is to be worn across the body, and inside there is a small waterproof bag as well to protect what's in there. And this is actually what's known as the pH hood, and once again it gets its name, like the hypo hood, it gets its name after the chemicals that the cloth is soaked in that it's made from. So this one is made of wool, but it has phenethexamine on it, which is why you get the pH from. And this one is double the thickness, so it's not like the first one that I showed you. That's relatively thin. This is double the thickness, and once again it's got this chemical impregnated into the cloth. Now, because it was double thickness, people did say it was really difficult to breathe into them, or to carry on doing hard work in them. If you can imagine filling sandbags or fighting in it, it'd be very difficult to do. So this one has an improvement, and I say it's an improvement, it pretty much is, and it's a one-way valve on the nose, and this allows for better breathing. But because it's a one-way valve, when you breathe out, the air will go out through here, but if you breathe in, it actually closes off. And you will see this with the Mickey Mouse gas mask that I showed you for the Second World War, and we're looking at what civilians wore in that time. This one's also got two little windows on, which actually focuses the eye better if you're firing. It's meant to be a vast improvement on the earlier one. But eventually, as I mentioned, gas was always evolving, new weapons were always evolving, and so was the gas mask to counteract it. It's also important to note that a lot of the gas was actually sent across to the enemy using huge cylinders, and then it would turn on the taps and pipes would pipe it out into no man's land. The danger of that is you're not usually that far away from the enemy to unleash it. So what they ended up doing is putting gas into shells, which meant that you could launch it for greater distances. And that is still a problem even today. If you ever go to France and Belgium, they often farmers are often ploughing up things like gas shells. Extremely dangerous. If you ever go there, please do not pick things up. It's a very dangerous thing to do. But going back to the topic, you've got those first two types of gas mask, and then obviously there was a few earlier sort of attempts at making a gas mask as well, including the black veil, which I didn't mention, but it was one of the early type of gas masks that was introduced. But then eventually you get what was known as the small box respirator, and this is the one in design that really continues into the Second World War. There are alterations to it, but in the Second World War this is the service respirator. But this in the Great War was known as the small box respirator, and it consists of a canister which has all the things that I've mentioned when we were looking at World War II gas mask. In other words, it's got cotton wool and things like that in the canister. It then has a hose attached to it, and then you've actually got the face piece, which you can see where this comes from. You've got the eyes, which are very much like we had in the earlier one. You've also got a one-way valve, which is very much like another earlier one. But this time, the box, which gives it the name, the box inside the bag contains all the very important things, the charcoal, the cotton wool and so on. So this is a vast improvement, and it was that much of an improvement that this continues really after the war, and then like I said, it's altered slightly to what they use in the Second World War. In this bag you don't just have a gas mask. They are now thinking that you need to keep this in good condition, so you do actually have attached to the filter a little book, and the little book, or card is pretty much what it is something that you can record when the gas mask is worn and when it's damaged. So it's quite important to keep a note of when it needs replacing, for example. You also get this tiny little cardboard sachet that contains patches which are used if your gas mask gets a hole in it. You can patch it up, very much like a puncture repair kit. You also have inside your bag a anti-dimming outfit, and this comes in a little cardboard box, and this was used to smear onto the lens of the gas mask. And if you smear the contents of that on the lens of the gas mask, it will actually stop it from steaming up. So once again, you can see how things have greatly improved from the early days of having a handkerchief over your face. So hopefully that's given you a bit of a whistle-stop tour. We haven't gone into too much detail, but a little whistle-stop tour of what soldiers in the British Army wore in the Great War to counteract gas. Now, on tomorrow's video, Ian is going to take the helm and he's going down the Royal Navy route, and he will also be showing you something that was the staple part of a sailor's diet for many years. Like I said, all this week we're celebrating Britain's armed forces. The army today in the Great War, tomorrow the Royal Navy, in particular Nelson's Navy, but maybe even later on, because the thing Ian's talking about was around for a very long time. Anyway, on that note, stay safe and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye bye.